So, good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the eighth edition of the A Blank Canvas webinar presented by Vascan. It's wonderful to have you all here with us today. My name is Fola Bomiamo, your host, as usual. You can just call me Fola, so it's not a tongue twister for you. But anyway, before we dive in, I want you to take a quick moment and cast your mind back to your childhood. Remember that boundless imagination, the drawing in biology textbooks, the fun projects in art class that made, Da Vinci even jealous. But anyway, today we are going to explore how to reconnect with that very essence. Our topic, every child is an artist, sustaining creativity into adulthood, tackles a question many of us grapple with. How do we keep with that vibrant creative spark alive? And, and how does it help us? And how do we keep that spark as adults? And we have the perfect guide for this journey. I'm absolutely delighted and honored to introduce our esteemed speaker, Phoebe Giffey-Brohaugh. Phoebe is an accomplished art practitioner, a co-founder of the Child Art Gallery and PNC Productions, and an inspiring advocate for art as a tool for social impact. Phoebe, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So now this isn't a lecture, it's a conversation, and we want this section to be as interactive as possible. So we'll be asking Phoebe questions, but we'd also like to hear from you. So please feel free to use the chat box, share your thoughts, share your comments, and if you have questions, please just drop it in the chat box, and then we'll circle back to them at the end of the webinar. So let's open up our paint books, Abby, or our canvas, and let's begin. So Phoebe, to kick us off, your work spans across children's art workshops and adult creative consulting. So from your perspective, what is the most significant shift or challenge in how individuals relate to their own creativity as they transition from childhood to adulthood?
Yeah, that's a great question to kind of kick off the conversation, I think. You know, being in tune with your creative side, I think, is almost a spiritual experience, right? There's something about being a child and just having the mindset to create. It's almost something that you do subconsciously. It's not necessarily that you sit down and you say, okay, today I'm going to make this painting, I'm going to sell it at an art gallery. It's just a natural experience that children engage with, and it's emotional. It encompasses different parts of the brain. It engages your thoughts and even your heart as well. So I think what happens as people mature is we face challenges in life. And to be honest, specifically within Nigeria, I think a lot of people struggle with creativity just because of the day-to-day challenges that we face. Life is quite unpredictable. And so when we don't necessarily feel a sense of safety or have a space to create freely and express ourselves freely, we're much less likely to actually engage in creativity and art. So I think it stems from a very significant sort of inner self and awareness of your inner self.
Thank you for the answer. So to piggyback off that, so how important do you think that safety, that's room to express, how important do you think that is for people to be able to express their creativity?
You know, I think it's a really intrinsic part of what it means to be human, actually. I think everybody contains a certain level of capacity to create. That doesn't mean necessarily that you're a visual artist. It could be performance art, for example, or it could even just be outside of art. For example, I think there's a lot of roles in science we use creativity. In engineering, we use innovation. So I think it's built in us as humans to create and innovate and think of new or transformative ways of doing things and expressing those ways of doing those new things.
One more question there before we move on. You talked on how creativity is in science, creativity is in everything that we do. But particularly in Nigeria, when we think of creativity, we think of people that write, people that act movies, people that paint or draw. How do you think, how would you define creativity, as an everyday thing in everything that we do?
Ooh, that's a tough question. That's similar to asking, like what is art, right? I think creativity is so subjective, but creativity comes down to like the process of engaging in creating, building things, forming ideas. I think it's a continual process. It's not necessarily one single thing. It's a process that we engage in. Yeah, I don't know if I have a specific definition of it, but I think it's a process of engaging in making things, basically.
No, thank you for that. I hope that the notion can be destroyed in Nigeria that creativity is for the arts or even for things that are less technical or physical. So, thank you. Also, thinking back to your own childhood, what was the specific creative moment or activity that you loved? And how do you think that experience shaped your journey into art and consulting today?
Yeah, for me, I think I was really lucky to live in a household and grow up with parents who were really supportive of my interests. So I would say most of my formative memories were surrounding art, whether it was me making art or like engaging with art. I grew up going to museums and art galleries, um, whether the museums were science museums or art museums, and that was a huge part of my childhood. Is just having access to the arts in the first place. And so I think that really laid a strong foundation for me in terms of navigating the art space. Just like any other subject, the visual arts have a lot of history. And even understanding what contemporary art is, for example, there's so much depth and width to it, especially when you look at it in different parts of the world. So I'm really grateful to have had that upbringing where I had access to some of those educational tools. And then aside from that, to be honest, I spent a lot of time outdoors as a child. I loved to honestly collect trash and rubbish and build different things out of them. I was very like mechanically minded as a child. Of course, I loved to paint and do all of those things too, but it wasn't until I was older and actually had the opportunity to have an art mentor throughout the age of 10 to 18 years old. But even before that, I remember just being obsessed with digging in dirt and building with clay and kind of making toys and something beautiful out of nothing. And I think that really informed my practice that I do now, where you don't necessarily have to be limited to specific tools, right? I think that's something that a lot of Nigerian artists are really engaging with as well in terms of access to creative tools. It can be very limited sometimes, but I think sometimes having limited resources is actually what kind of makes your practice more genuine. Because with that limitation, you now have to focus on, okay, how do I still express my creative practice with those limited resources that I have?
Thank you very much. So, I mean, talking about the limitations that you mentioned, I mean, some people push through that, and the genius in them really comes out, and some people don't. So, what are the some of the other things that you think affects people's creativity as they grow up? Like some of the things that limits them from, being the artist or having that creativity as they grow older.
Honestly, I think support structure is really, really important. As an adult, for example, getting to know other artists and creatives is really important, especially as you're navigating sort of the business of art, getting to know other artists and what their experiences have been, even so you can kind of compare your own experiences once you start having those like commercial conversations, for example. But just in general, having a community that supports your passion and your interests is really, really important. I think especially we saw that during COVID, when those relationships were a bit more strained. I think that's when I really realized how important it is to have people who understand you and support you, and not necessarily that they have to be interested in the same exact things. I think some of my closest friends are people who are not even artists, but they know me as an artist, and so they're supportive of me. They're able to provide even critique and feedback. For example, like if I'm frustrated about an experience I've had, I have some people that I can go to and say, how should I navigate this? Did I do the right thing? Should I have done something differently? And that has really been a backbone for me in kind of growing my practice and all that it can include. Because there's really no roadmap to practicing artists or just even being in the creative community. A lot of us are freelance, or a lot of us are actually working 9-to-5 jobs and have our creative practices on the side. There's a lot of startups, for example. So having people around you that can support you and provide advice and all of that, I think has been really, really important for me.
Thank you for that answer. So, given your experience with the U Village Library and the Children's Art Library, what are some of the lessons that you've learned in your process of working with children that we can directly apply to regaining that creativity as adults?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, when the gallery first started, I think what we were most shocked about is how incredible the art was by the kids. A lot of the pieces that were getting submitted to the gallery when we first started, I was absolutely shocked at how in depth the works were, how each child had their own specific style that they were developing. And I think that there's this level of genius that children have. I think their art isn't as forced. Like I said, it's creating and making things is something that's just kind of naturally a part of what children do. And so that has really inspired me, and I was really glad to kind of get back into that mindset, especially when we're doing workshops with the kids. For example, I would sit down and maybe think I should have like a very specific structure. And typically what happens when you're workshopping with kids is about halfway through, you lose all sense of that structure because they take the subject matter and they just run with it. Especially if you kind of set the scene and create that safe space for them where they feel that they have control and the freedom to create. That's when you really see them thrive. And that's been really inspiring for me to kind of go back to those roots a little bit and feeling more free to explore creatively, because I think it can, as you get older, it can really turn into like, okay, how do I make my money out of this? How do I do this? And I think, to be honest, I wish that we had more of a capacity to continue to keep our practices hobbies. And so something that's been important for me to do as well is to try new things, honestly, try different ways to input creativity into my practices and the work that I do. Like, for example, I do digital strategy and media and communications in addition to my artistic practice. And so seeing how I can kind of input creative influence into that has been really important for me as well.
Thank you. So, I mean, talking about space for people to grow and people to express themselves as artists, how can we as adults, as individuals, and as communities create environments that actively support and sustain adult creativity? Because I think as a child, it's easier to say, oh, you want to paint. They see it as, okay, the child is just playing with, color paints or watercolors and things like that. But as adults, like you said, they are bills to pay, their mouths to feed, and things like that. So, how can we, how can we create communities that still have that importance, that the art is important, and those hobbies, like you call them, are still important for us to express ourselves.
Definitely. I think, well, in terms of Lagos, we're very lucky because there is such a renaissance with the arts that's happening within this city. There's tons of collectives and communities that are popping up all over the place, even like outside of the arts as well. For example, groups of young women and young men who are getting together and just talking about what it means to navigate life in a big city, right? And I think that is even starting to spread across Nigeria. I remember earlier this year, I had the chance to meet a few artists at +234 Art Fair who were based in the north or other parts of Nigeria, who also were talking about, them coming together as collectives. Especially for artists, I think we can feel really isolated sometimes. A lot of us are introverts, and that's how we're able to create, is kind of in our own bubble. But we also can't really just wait for those communities to happen by ourselves, right? So if you're living in an area, for example, where there's not really anything, it might be up to you to start something, right? And we've seen that this is like history repeating itself. We've seen that with how the arts have developed in Nigeria as well.
That's what I just mentioned. So
yeah, and yeah, no problem. There's been a number of collectives since like the 1950s within Nigeria who were really key in progressing the arts. So I think something that I've learned is you can't really wait for that community to find you. You either need to find some sort of collective or community, or if you don't have access to that, you can start working on building it yourself. That's one place to start. Like, for example, with the Children's Art Gallery, my co-founder and I, we both come from very different backgrounds, but both of us had this idea, and we started to do some research about, is there anyone else out there who's specifically looking to support children and their welfare through the visual arts? We didn't come across anything. So we realized when we started almost 3 years ago now that it was really kind of a grand experiment. We weren't sure how exactly it would work. We were taking things step by step, but I think also just having the kids come together from all sorts of different backgrounds all across Lagos, and then we started getting submissions from children across Nigeria. We realized that it was also an opportunity for children from all sorts of different backgrounds within the country to get to know each other and support each other as well. But we just had to try. We didn't know if it was going to work out or not. And so I think that's what I would encourage all of us to do is, if you don't have that community, see how you can join something or see if you can start something yourself. Like especially with social media, for example, even Zoom, for example, we're having this session, all of us are in different locations. We have a lot of tools at our fingertips that can help us find those communities.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to follow up on that a little bit. So, I mean, for adults who might not even identify as artists, so I think there are some people who already like to paint and they are looking for people, looking for communities to join and actually be a part of them. But there are some people who don't even identify as artists at all, but want to maybe integrate more creativity to their work and daily lives, or they just want to start off, at the very beginning. Where would you suggest they start? What are some low barrier entry points?
So again, I think we're really lucky in this digital age that we have access to so many things. So if you're looking to at least start kind of educating yourself about the arts, Google Arts and Culture is a fantastic place to kind of learn about things. Specifically, if you're wanting to learn about different museum archives, for example, they do virtual tours of different museums, and they also have a lot of really interesting resources specifically about like present day as well as historical movements that happened within Nigeria. And then I would say if you are lucky enough to be in a city or a town where there are art galleries, definitely start visiting exhibitions or even interior design spaces. A lot of times we'll have local artists pieces on display, and just having access to and seeing the art, first of all, I think is really enjoyable. It's great for your mental health to kind of get out of your comfort zone, start exploring something just for the visual appeal of it, first of all. But then if it interests you, you can kind of take it a step further and start learning about different art forms and techniques. A lot of the really well-established galleries here in Lagos are really fantastic at curation. So typically they'll have curatorial essays that share about the artists and the intent behind the exhibition. And as a lot of people don't like to read those, but I think it gives such a profound understanding of where the artists are coming from, where the art galleries are coming from as well, in terms of kind of supporting this art market. And there's money in this market. Aside from it being enjoyable, I think even if you're not an artist, this is something that you should be interested in because there's money behind it. A lot of affluent people, not just within Nigeria, but around the world, are collecting West African art, whether that's historical or contemporary pieces. And there's definitely a reason for that, right? And now as well with the digital age that we're in with NFTs and opportunity to collect digital art as well. I think it's a huge part of financial literacy that we should educate ourselves on. So first and foremost, I think it's just something enjoyable. So if you're able to do it, it will greatly impact your mental health. And it's interesting. So I would start from there and then just see where it takes you. If you're interested in getting to know artists as well, a lot of galleries or different collectives will organize artist talks. Now as well in Lagos, we're starting to see different sessions where artists are actually showing you the process of how they make their pieces. And that's happening outside of Lagos as well. For example, if you're interested in how tie and dye is done, different adire fabrics, you can still go to the factories and actually watch that process and sometimes make them yourselves. And I think that's a fantastic place to start because it also gives you a sense of how difficult it actually is to make some of these pieces, right? You just see the finished product, you think, oh, that's interesting, or maybe you like it, maybe it's not your cup of tea. But once you actually engage in the process of making art, maybe it's taking a pottery class, for example, you start to realize how much of an art form and technique it takes to make something like that. So those are just a few points where I would say if you're not an artist, you can start to get more engaged with the arts.
Yeah, thank you very much. So one more question on this subject. So we are all products of our environment. So as children, I think it might be easier for a child to paint something unique. Maybe it's easier for them to express themselves. But as adults, we tend to find that maybe it's because of the content you've consumed, of artwork you've seen, and that follows the way you have to paint or the way you have to express yourself creatively. And what are some things you can suggest to people that are trying to become artists or express their creativity and how they can find their own true voice or their own unique style?
Definitely. It's interesting you asked this question actually because I attended an artist talk during Lagos Art Week last year, and I actually had this question for the artist that was speaking. And I remember what she shared was really interesting. So aside from being a visual artist, she also loves to write. And something that I loved about her pieces were how simplistic they were, but conceptually the subject matter was really in depth. And she said before she even starts making any of her pieces, she actually does some really extensive writing. And so I think journaling and having kind of daily time set aside where you can try to write is really important. And again, I think that's a really fantastic benefit for your mental health as well. If writing is absolutely not your thing, I think picking up hobbies are really fantastic. Maybe like beadwork, or I'm actually learning a new thing right now, which is knitting and crocheting. And you'll also find that some of those things are actually quite useful. For example, if you're practicing daily writing, even if it's journal entries, you're absolutely going to see how that translates into your work. I think as great as this digital age is, we're also seeing that having access to AI like ChatGPT, for example, as helpful as it is, we're in a day and age where kind of everything that's written is really becoming homogenous. You know, if you're going on social media and you're seeing ad campaigns where, you know, you're seeing these captions, you can tell that most of the captions on social media these days are written by chatbots. So we're starting to face an era where, as diverse as this world is and as connected as it is, the written language that we see online is really homogenous and kind of from one transcript. So the more that we practice writing, the more that we actually practice different hobbies and getting our hands engaged physically in something, I think that will translate to different areas of our lives. But writing, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that. So to touch on technology, so is it necessarily a good thing or a bad thing? Because, like you said the way we are looking at captions on social media these days, there is a homogeneous voice to it. Which sometimes it's even getting to a point where you read something, particularly if you're a writer or an avid reader, read something and be like, that's AI, or you read something and feel like it's probably artificial intelligence. So I think, is it necessarily a good thing right now to have that much artificial intelligence in the world today?
You know, to be honest, it's very complex. I don't know if I have a yes or no answer to that. I think something I've been thinking about recently is all of a sudden we've all got access to this tool, but we never really got an education on how to utilize the tool in terms of ethically using AI. And now that also kind of translates into AI art. A lot of AI art is inspired, or I can't even say inspired. A lot of AI art actually plagiarizes real artists' pieces, and so that's really unfortunate. So I think I wish that, and maybe there's tools out there that I'm not aware of, but I think it would be really interesting if we could have more access to maybe courses that would teach us how to ethically use AI and how to use AI in a way that actually helps us expand our work. Um, but it's also complex as well because there's actually a lot of environmental harm with AI. So it's quite different than just like a normal search engine, for example, like Googling something, but the carbon footprint of actually using AI leaves a really terrible mark on the environment. So I have really mixed feelings about it, to be honest, but I think us at least having the knowledge of how AI works, the effects that it has, how AI learns from people using it is important to think about. Because I fear that art and writing is kind of headed into one single direction. And then, to be honest, we also kind of have to face reality in the sense that the workload that's expected of people in this day and age is a lot. And so it sort of forces us to almost rely on AI in order to get our work done. Especially if you're in the creative industry, there's a lot of small businesses running. You don't necessarily have a large team where someone's just focusing on writing essays and captions or different copywriting materials, for example. There's small businesses or maybe artists who don't have lawyers. So they might go to ChatGPT to get an understanding of maybe a contract they have to sign or something. So there's a lot of really important, useful ways to use it. But there's so many pros and there's so many cons. I'm not quite sure how to give a yes or no answer, but I think education is quite key. So definitely take the time to educate yourself on how you can utilize AI in the best way possible if you're going to use it.
Yes, I think one thing AI has done, it has made it difficult for people to stand out because you have to almost think outside of the box. You have to, even be a bit crazy to, make sure that your work stands out against AI. Because sometimes when you go to the chatbot, you ask it to write something, and then you write it in such a way that you're like, why didn't I think of that? Oh, that's actually very good. So there's sometimes a bit of jealousy with it as well. So I think it's also very important that we don't lose our creativity and we don't lose the inner child in us, I guess, on the subject matter of our hand. So to shift gears a bit, why is sustaining creativity into adulthood not just a nice to have, but essential for individual well-being, problem solving? I think you mentioned mental health as well, societal progress, especially in a place like Nigeria or, I mean, Africa in a more broader context.
Yeah, I mean, I think within Nigeria as well, we have to look at our history. And there's so much rich heritage that we have here in terms of traditional crafts. And there's a lot of artists out there now who are kind of taking traditional crafts and transforming them for the future. So aside art, and this is a personal testament of mine, I think almost any artist that you would ask, any creative that you would ask would say that art plays a really foundational role in their mental health. But it's also a sense of identity that we have as well. Us expressing ourselves, I think, allows us to kind of tap into our personal stories, as well as express what's happening around us. I think about art that's been preserved throughout history. If you look at like the hieroglyphics from the Egyptians, or landmarkings that are in South Africa and different places in South America, for example, even in North America. In fact, I think you could probably find ancient art almost everywhere around the world. It's a key into understanding what our history was. So art also is a way to kind of preserve our stories and our identity and our heritage, and that's really special to engage with. I think once you understand where you come from, it allows you to understand where you're going as well, and that's really powerful.
Yes, I think culture is very, very important, particularly in a country like Nigeria that has, over 350 tribes. I mean, three major tribes, but that's over 350 tribes. So many languages, so many unique ways people can express themselves. I think it's very important that you don't really forget where they come from, and who they are. So looking ahead, now I'm going to shift gears to technology, not AI, but how do you see technology playing a role in helping adults sustain and discover their creativity? What excites you about the intersection between art and technology for lifelong creative development?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think there's some really incredible tools out there for creatives and artists from all different perspectives, right? Like, for example, gallerists, they're engaging with large groups of artists now. They're exhibiting their pieces online. And so getting these digital and tech tools really helps artists kind of expand their audiences, and that's quite exciting. And then in terms of organization, I think it's really key. So, for example, like Vascan, you can save tons of time by just having your pieces organized, having one collated place where you can access all of your information about your art, whether you're an artist or a gallerist. And for me, having those tools is really key because it also opens up my time and my creativity for other things that are a lot more important. I mean, for example, the Children's Art Gallery, when we first started working with Vascan, we had about 500 pieces that were being processed through the gallery. And just having one single space to kind of collate all that information, so that we just had peace of mind and knew that we were organized, that each of the artists had this many of pieces and just had track of our inventory, was really key for me because it opened up so much of my time to be able to focus on networking, connecting with the artists individually, and that's quite important as well. And then, for example, even spaces like LinkedIn, for example, I think I would really encourage any artist, a lot of artists or people that are in the arts and cultures industry aren't on LinkedIn, but that's a really fantastic place to connect with other people that are in all different places around the world, in different capacities as well. For example, if you're looking to connect with specific curators or art dealers that work with a very specific niche type of art, it's a guarantee that you can find people like that on LinkedIn, and they're also looking for people like you. So technology, I think, is really bridging the gap in terms of how artists are connected to the art market around the world, how they exhibit their art to a more global audience. And for me, that's really exciting because while we face certain limitations depending on where we are, we have access to tools that allow us to get past those limitations. And a lot of these tools are either free or they're pretty affordable. So that's exciting for me.
Oh, thank you very much for the answer, and thank you for the free plugs. But anyway, so for just to piggyback on that, because I remember a time when auctions were just a physical thing. There were no, you couldn't buy things at an auction without being there physically. But now we have options digitally. You can, watch a Sotheby's live stream, or you can take part in a Christie's auction online, and so on and so forth. And even on Vascan, like you mentioned, you can exhibit online. You can put your entire art library online as well. What would you say to people that are a bit skeptical about doing something like that? Because at the end of the day, art is still a physical thing. But you want to experience it, you want to touch it, you want to feel it by yourself. So, what would you say to people that are a bit skeptical of, taking that jump, taking that step with technology?
I think definitely comes down to education and getting to know people who have already kind of experienced it, getting to understand the ins and outs of the industry. Because from the outside, it really seems, I'd say, almost whimsical. But when in reality, the art market works in very specific ways. So getting a bit of an education on kind of the process of what it means to sell and resell art is really important. And also understand why you're skeptical of it. I think from an artist perspective, as an artist, you can be a bit skeptical because you're cautious of how your work is exhibited. For example, a lot of artists have had really terrible experiences of somebody selling their piece, but they don't get paid until much further down the road. Or maybe a collector resells an artist piece after they've purchased it, but not within the framework that the artist had hoped for. So if you're consulting with someone who can kind of help you safeguard your pieces and your practice is really important. There's a whole category of laws surrounding artists and their pieces and who has the rights to those pieces. So definitely educate yourself about it. Join forums if you're able to do that. WAMA Africa last year it's a community of women in the art sector, specifically within West Africa. Last year we had a few sessions about art law, and it was in partnership with I'm trying to think of the name, but it'll come to me. A law program based in South Africa. And so they took a few sessions to just compare about art and law within South Africa, within Nigeria, and I believe within the UK. And just getting an understand for the framework of some of those things was quite key for me, I think. But yeah, I think it depends on where you're coming into the market, whether you're an artist or even someone who's potentially interested in collecting as well. It really comes down to also understanding just how the industry works, particularly in terms of selling art and reselling art, and then understanding the primary. Okay, yes. So I was just saying, depending on who you are and why you're interested or skeptical of how the market works, understanding the different trends in terms of type of pieces are popular and what pieces are selling at auction and why. It's actually really fascinating. A lot of the reasons certain types of art are popular are based off of even events that are happening around the world, whether politically or just stories that are trending. A lot of those are tied into what type of art is popular and why. So aside from it being a really important industry, I think it's also really fascinating and as well gives us a specific understanding of what is happening within our specific cultures, as well as kind of what's happening globally as well.
All right, Joanne, thank you very much. I think one final question from me before I open to the audience for questions. So what final piece of advice or encouragement would you offer someone who believes they've lost their childhood creativity, the inner child artist in them, and is looking to regain it back, to bring it back into their life?
That is a fantastic question. I think that's really, really important. And at any point in time, I think a lot of us are kind of experiencing that, where we've kind of lost our shine and are looking to get back to our inner child in a sense. So I would say just take time for yourself. Be forgiving of yourself. We're all human beings and we make a lot of mistakes. A lot of us are honestly carrying around a history, right? We are the way we are because of what's happened to us and how we were raised. So getting to understand yourself and know yourself is quite important. And art is a really beautiful channel in being able to do that in a fun way. So I would say definitely take time to just get to know yourself and have fun a little bit. You know, life can be quite serious. So if you have the opportunity to engage in art, it can be as simple as just doodling and drawing in a sketchbook every once in a while. Any type of creative engagement that you can do, I guarantee you, you're going to experience your spirit lifted, and you'll feel a creative burst of energy after you engage with art. So I would encourage anyone who feels like they may be struggling with their mental health or emotional health to really engage with art in any way possible.
Yeah, thank you very much, Phoebe, for that answer and for your time. I think there are no questions from the chat. I guess they all enjoyed this as much as I did. Thank you so much for your time. I'm very grateful. To people that joined, thank you for your presence, and to the people that didn't, the video will be up on YouTube before the end of the weekend. So thank you very much, Phoebe, and we'd love to have you again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. Thank you. That brings us to the end of this webinar episode. Yes, thank you all for joining. Catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.